All right. Hello, my name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. Love tonight's topic. Happy Pride Month, everybody, by the way. Thank you to Chester County's Office of Drug and Alcohol Services. They are our partner for this program, so very, very grateful to them for their continued support. You can follow up on tonight's program by visiting this page of our website. I'll put some links in the chat in just a moment, but this is conversation.zone/LGBT. We have a number of resources on that page, lots and lots of resources. So I hope you'll check that out, dedicated to this topic. We do have a YouTube channel where recordings like this one will be living after tonight. So we have more than 190 programs recorded. They range in all the topics that we have will be quite clear when you visit this channel, because we go from prevention to intervention to deep dives on particular substances, pathways to recovery, supporting families, all of that. I am a family member. I'm the daughter of somebody in recovery. I'm also the parent of somebody in recovery. These parent partnership meetings are still a big part of my life. If you're familiar with Al-Anon or Nar-Anon, it's similar, but those are 12-step meetings. We highly recommend them. This is hopefully a supplement to that. And what's unique about them is they're not 12-step, but also they are all parents or guardians or grandparents in that parental role. They take place every week throughout the year, 5 days a week. We have currently 19 meetings every week. We actually are excited to share that beginning in September, we are going to be starting a sibling partnership meeting. Damien, one of our speakers tonight, will recall that we honored somebody just recently at our fundraising event who was shining a light on the role of the sibling who's been impacted by someone's substance use disorder. This is a population that doesn't get nearly enough attention. We've had a number of community programs. We just had one last night about the sibling role, but this will be an opportunity to have a weekly meeting. There's currently a once monthly meeting with Care and Treatment Center. That is the meeting actually that is transitioning over to be a part of the conversation. So it will still be the same time, Wednesday nights, 8 to 9. More on that later, but that should be starting up in September, while we'll be meeting weekly with siblings over the age of 18 who've been impacted by their sibling's substance use disorder. We also have something called the Family Recovery Course. This again is strictly for parents or guardians, grandparents. This is a 3-part course that is really helpful for those of us whose child is living with a substance use disorder, as an active addiction, not ready for treatment, or perhaps they've had some time in recovery, but we're still feeling some of the trauma that came with that, some of the white knuckling, the emotions that are still there. Maybe we're still very enmeshed in their lives, which is pretty natural when we've been through all of these kinds of things. So this has been really tremendous outcomes with this. We have a 93% retention rate. We don't charge for any of our services, including the family recovery course. So they're really staying with it. And then they connect to the parent partnership meetings, and they find other ways to stay active with our organization so that they can work their program. Well, hopefully at some point their loved one will work theirs as well. So I'm now going to tell you about our first speaker, who is Lewis Johnson. Lewis is the owner and trauma therapist for the Lotus Center for Wellness and Healing, his private practice, which is in Upper Darby, PA. He's a licensed professional counselor and national certified counselor supporting clients in Pennsylvania. Lewis currently serves as the past president of PA Service, the Pennsylvania Association for Spiritual, Ethical, and Religious Values in Counseling. Lewis's passions center around working with adolescents and adults in the Black and LGBTQIA+ communities on issues of racial and identity-based trauma, religious abuse and spiritual trauma, gun violence, and men's issues. As an educator and speaker, Lewis presents on topics of racial trauma, religion and spirituality, trauma-informed care, suicide prevention, vicarious and secondary trauma, therapist self-care practices, and working with Black and LGBTQIA+ folks. Lewis earned his master's degree in pastoral clinical mental health counseling at Newman University in Aston, Pennsylvania. So, wow, Lewis, no moss growing on you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction, Kim. I really appreciate it. And welcome to everyone here tonight. I'm very excited to um, to be here to speak on this topic. Um, so in transparency, I'm not a person in recovery. However, I am an individual who identifies as a gay Black man. And I think that speaks volumes as, I can relate to aspects of, what the community has experienced and continues to experience. And I can share just a little bit about my journey as well. And I want to speak to the importance of having those supportive people in your life, um, and how that all factors into it. So I have a PowerPoint here, and I'm really just going to touch upon how trauma impacts it can factor into the issues that the community is experiencing, as well as giving an overview of that and just some of the unique challenges that the community experiences, which leads to or can lead to using substances. So today we're going to just be speaking about being LGBTQIA plus and healing from substance abuse. So I always love whenever I'm doing any workshop that involves, discussing the LGBTQIA plus community. I always like to lead with this quote because I really feel that it encompasses the experience of so many LGBTQIA plus folks. And I know for me, it definitely speaks to my experience. So it is queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpick which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect us. Alexander Leon, a writer at the LGBTQ group Kaleidoscope Trust. And I feel that that quote really does speak to the experience that I've heard from so many LGBTQA plus folks, especially for adults who maybe did not have the opportunity to come out or, were would potentially face, losing their home or financial support. So when they get into adulthood and they are supporting themselves financially and such and have a home, they start to really can start to really embrace that identity and embrace it, at a time where developmentally, those teen years are when a lot of us are forming our own identities, especially forming our identity away from, our loved ones, parents, guardians, and such, really exploring that. And for someone who identifies as LGBTQIA plus, that doesn't always happen that way, because more than anything, they're trying to protect themselves, or there might be shame that comes along with it. Or, as I was saying, and we'll get into it, there might also be the potential loss of, financial support or losing their home. So all of these things can play into it, which, leads to being in adulthood when they can fully step into that identity. I want to highlight first just a few things, specifically SAMHSA. So SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which was established in the early 1990s to really provide that access and resources for substance abuse and mental health. So really creating almost like a, one-stop shop, a database for looking at the intersectionalities of substance abuse and mental health, how those two things play together. Really looking at the impacts of adverse childhood experiences, and really having a database where individuals, whether it be clinicians, mental health professionals, and just everyday people as well, to access those resources to learn more about substance abuse and mental health, and preventative factors for all of these too. And another important piece to highlight too is just that in 2014, SAMHSA developed the trauma-informed principles. And I bring that into it because these principles, which, that would be a whole other training, I would say, but these principles are key principles to help, agencies as well as organizations really deliver that quality care to patients and clients, to staff, to employees, the whole gamut, through a lens that recognizes that significant impact that trauma can cause on every aspect of a person's life. Um, so when looking and using those trauma-informed principles, and that plays into also offering that LGBTQIA plus affirming care to help mitigate the challenges that come along with substance abuse, these trauma-informed principles, I feel, are really lay that foundation for that. And like I said, we won't necessarily get into specifically the six trauma-informed principles and what they are, but I just wanted to introduce those to everyone to do some, additional research just to see, their importance and how it plays into it. Um, So oftentimes I would say, we might hear that, fill in the blank is the gateway drug or, to other things. And I would go out and say that really trauma is. Trauma is the thing that leads to using substances or alcohol or, self-injurious behaviors as well. Trauma really is, you know, the thing that a lot of us can struggle to cope with, especially when we don't necessarily know how much it impacts us. So SAMHSA defines trauma as resulting from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So really, it impacts every facet of a person's life, how they respond to the world around them, their behaviors, relationships. It can impede on just their work life as well. So I really wanted to just highlight that because, as I said, that I really do, trauma is the gateway to all of these other things that an individual may experience. So now, before we really look at some of the specifics of, what is impacting the community, I just have a series of slides that really show some of the things that the LGBTQIA plus community are experiencing, what they are seeing in their everyday lives. And I believe that in seeing these various graphs, it's going to give you an idea of, then what can lead to that, to substance abuse, and all of its negative impacts. So the first graph here is tracking the rise of anti-trans bills in the US. So dating back to 2015, and I imagine it really goes back before that. But I wanted to just highlight in particular, as we see here, highlight in particular 2022, where, the numbers were high. However, we can see just from 2022 to 2025, just the massive increase that we are seeing here. So just, and you can see what it is in 2023 and 2024. But I just want to highlight in particular, for example, that there in 2022, there were 7 bills related to the bathroom, which, as we know, people use to relieve themselves. However, there are specific bills that were established, so going from 7 in 2022 to 53 in 2025, and we're not even finished a full 6 months of this year yet. Um, that are specifically targeting the LGBTQIA plus community. In sports, going from 60 in 2022 to 116. So basically almost doubling there. In healthcare, which is a big portion of just even this presentation today, and working with individuals with substance abuse, from 37 bills to 195 bills, just as what's today, June 25th. Um, that is where we're at in 2025. And then in education, 49 to 261. And then others, bills as well, going from 21 to 315. So as we can see that, even when specifically looking at healthcare, when individuals are looking to heal, to navigate, their addiction and what they're experiencing. There are bills out there specifically in healthcare that are targeting this community that are preventing that, that are not giving them the access to the care that they need and deserve. Um, and that how it's a trickle down effect when they're not receiving that affirming care. And it makes, their ability to heal, to be in recovery that much harder. Um, so just looking at here, looking at, that gender affirming care, which becomes incredibly pivotal, especially, um, in those various programs that are geared towards individuals navigating substance abuse, that just in providing that gender affirming healthcare, specifically, once again, looking from 2022 to, they didn't have this year just yet, because I believe they just highlight the entire year. But just looking from 2022 to 2024, went from 40 bills to 189 bills. And math is not my strong suit, but that would be almost quadruple, right? I think. But quadruple in numbers in the number of bills. And while I don't have the numbers for 2025, I would guess that that number has significantly increased just based on what we are seeing in our current political and social climate right now, that those bills have probably gone up, the number of bills. Specifically in Pennsylvania, as that's where I am, and I imagine many individuals are as well. Just looking at Pennsylvania, thus far in 2025, there have been 8 anti-trans bills that have been introduced in 4 different categories. Those categories we saw of healthcare, education, sports, and other as well. Some of those include, I'll just, we have sports and education there, but specifically looking at healthcare. PA 1033, prohibiting gender transition procedures for minors and coverage for gender transition procedures for minors. And this act prohibits gender transition procedures for minors and coverage for them as well. And it's a bill that was introduced right now. And when our youth are getting this messaging at such an early age, um, it's one thing hearing this messaging as an adult, but when you're getting this messaging as a youth, when your brain's not fully developed yet, you are already navigating just being youth, a teenager, developing your identity as well, and then hearing that the procedures that are life-saving at the end of the day. Those gender affirming procedures are life-saving. To hear that there are bills that are going out there to stop that, and then potential repercussions that are happening for the doctors who are performing, these procedures as well. That is just one of the many things that can lead to finding other ways to cope with the pain, the loss, and it's almost also an ambiguous loss too, of a loss of knowing that your life can be this, but you may not achieve it just based on, the policies, the bills that are out there that are trying to stop that from happening. So then, because of that, that is where an individual might turn to substances instead, turning to alcohol instead as a way to cope with um, what they're experiencing. And sometimes too, and we'll get into that, using it too as a way to just feel better about themselves. It might be the kind of thing where they are using it to um, almost boost their self-esteem, or they believe that's what's happening. So just looking at these numbers here of this was based on the results from the 2023 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. Um, Looking at the numbers of alcohol use, so we see that with these numbers, looking at LGBT plus, those who are not sure, and those who identify as heterosexual, looking at their, in this particular report, just looking specifically at female and male. In this particular report, that LGBT plus youth were more likely than their heterosexual counterparts to have used alcohol in the past month. And about 1 in 10 LGBTQ plus youth used alcohol. And specifically looking, gearing a little bit towards the youth, because that is when oftentimes it can start, using substances. Not saying it cannot happen in adulthood, because it absolutely can. However, some of those preventative factors can be established in while someone is still a youth in their teen years as well. So as you can just see, just looking at these numbers, so for example, 10.6 LGBTQ males versus heterosexuals 6.0 that we see here. So just significant differences as it goes across the entire board, um, especially looking at those who identify as LGBT plus versus those who identify as heterosexual because of all the additional factors, which we'll touch upon a little more shortly. Um, and then just looking further at these graphs here of just past month, once again, referring to the 2023 study of just binge alcohol use versus heavy alcohol use, noticing that just more than half of LGBT plus alcohol users were binge drinkers. Um, just really, especially too in this community, especially, when someone is older and of, legal drinking age, that really is a part of the community oftentimes as well. Like the use of various substances and being in those social settings, using alcohol as well, plays into it too. And I just want to highlight too that, this study that they did was looking at age 12 and up. So just taking a moment to think about that at 12 years old, when an individual, you know, they should be really thinking about their identity and who they are and being 12 years old. And instead, they're being faced with these additional things that they're seeing, especially in our age of social media. Um, you know, I, I can only speak from my experience, and personally for me, like social media just wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is now. Honestly, social media didn't become like really oops. didn't become, let me go back here. Here we go. Social media didn't become really prevalent until maybe as I was finishing high school more than anything. Like, so, seeing the things that we are, seeing now, like, having access to the news, knowing what is happening just in our country and the world in general, that attack on the LGBTQIA plus community, having that information, it wasn't easily accessible. Um, in a way, it was, I look back on it, from my experience of it being a blessing in sort of a way, not knowing everything that was going on. Um, because I do believe that had I known just various things that were going on, I could have been a lot more susceptible um, to engaging in things that could have took me down a very different path, or engaging with people that could have taken me down a very different path as well. So now just breaking down further binge alcohol use in the past month by sexual identity. Um, just looking here specifically, I want to highlight that individuals who identify as heterosexual versus, those who identify as gay male, lesbian female, bisexual, or another identity, just that the numbers, as we see here, are always higher than those who are identified as heterosexual because of the additional pieces that they're having to navigate. Um, and then I'll move a little quicker through these as well, but just further looking at some of these graphs just to see how the numbers are always very skewed because of those other factors that they're having to navigate, those factors which ultimately are trauma that they're having to navigate. So that's just looking at hallucinogenics, prescription drug misuse, inhalant use as well. Looking at breakdown of substances specifically that individuals are using, you'll see that the numbers are greatest with alcohol use and marijuana. And honestly, I would say, so this is based on 2023. I imagine that nicotine vaping will probably increase even more so when they do that report again, just because of how accessible it is to our young people right now, and just um, starting younger and younger having access to that. So I'd be very curious to see what those numbers look like when they do a report, as I do imagine they will increase from, that 4.9 million. I can see that increasing. So that too, just looking at illicit drug use, all of these graphs, as as we're seeing here, really just speaking to how the numbers for individuals who identify as a part of the LGBTQIA plus community versus those who identify as heterosexual. Okay, and that's also just looking at illicit drug use as well. So I really want to just talk about the impact of it all. So I would first start by saying that, this presentation doesn't also talk about the intersectionality of other identities as well. Individuals who identify as, another race or religion and such. We're not touching upon any of that. However, all of that factors into this as well. But specifically, we're just going to look at, the impact for the LGBTQIA plus community. So something that, we're having to navigate every day, unfortunately, is just that social stigma of what it means to be LGBTQA plus, the misunderstandings of what it is, the misrepresentations of the community as well. For example, the microaggressions that they might experience of, what comes to mind is um, someone knowing that you identify as a part of the community and asking you, like, when you share that you're married, and you're like, oh, you're married? As if that's not possible. Or saying, oh, you had children? What, how though? Something that seems so small has significant repercussions, having to hear that constantly. And in this society of which we live in as well, there's also the experience of living in a very heteronormative society. So basically, there's almost an understanding that, you identify as heterosexual until you don't, kind of thing, is an experience that often is happening as well. Then there's the discrimination and harassment that those among the community are experiencing. Um, this might include bullying, whether it be in the workplace, it can be at school, experiences that they might be having at home as well, the stressors that lie there. There might be, things that are happening in, sports teams or other extracurricular activities or other communities that they might be a part of, experiencing and hearing about that discrimination and harassment and those hate crimes that we hear about so often, unfortunately, that are happening in our society, and the messaging that constantly is happening. The individual might turn to substances as a way to cope as of internalized homophobia, being ashamed of, who they are, or, what they believe in as well because of that constant messaging that they're hearing. Um, when an individual, might be turning to substances as a way to cope as well, it might be as a result of homelessness that they might experience. It could also be, um, loss of financial support. Oftentimes we hear of, especially when it's youth too, that they are losing their financial support, sometimes losing insurance, leading to homelessness, not having that home. Um, and like I said, this would definitely be a much longer presentation if we got into it, but just all of the additional factors that come into there of, you know, experiences of child trafficking or sex trafficking as well, and how all of these things that ultimately coming back to simply how they identify and who they are. So it's almost starting at their identity has, unfortunately led to these various challenges and issues happening. And, using substances can be a way to cope with the stress, can be a way to numb themselves from feeling anything at all. It can also serve as a way to increase their self-esteem at what they believe might be increasing their self-esteem when ultimately it's, leading potentially to addictions as well. Um, and oftentimes what we will see among this community even more so is, using substances or even alcohol, drugs, whatever it might be, for sexual performance. So there are substances that out there that maybe decrease one's inhibitions, provides them with more stamina as well. That oftentimes, among this community, in my experience and being around, being among the community also um, is very normalized in a way. It's something that we see pretty often in the community as well. So all of these things, as I have mentioned, the struggles that they're experiencing are those additional stressors that they're having to face that can lead to using substances as an outlet. And in particular, I wanted to highlight this piece here because I believe that, this will also lead to, in this article, the termination of the National LGBTQ plus Youth Suicide Lifeline on July 17th of this year. I believe that, this lifeline, which has, professionals who have that specialized training in LGBTQIA plus care, I believe that with this new order that has happened, that there will be also another increase in using substances because they don't have this lifeline, this very specialized lifeline for support. Where do they go to turn to? They might turn to some kind of substances or alcohol to cope with that. So I wanted to just highlight that piece because I really do think that, this is just another issue that impacts the community and further exacerbates um, the mental health challenges and stressors that they are having. And this is literally just a week ago, as you see, June 18th, so a week ago. So this really speaks to just the real-time issues that are happening on a daily basis. And amidst all of this, I think it's important to really speak to how this can be prevented. What are some things that we can do as, family members, as, mental health professionals as well, to support this community, to create spaces that are affirming, that, in the midst of everything that's happening, that there are more of those supportive factors. So, according to the Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, LGBTQIA plus affirming care is defined as an approach to therapy that embraces a positive view of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer identities and relationships, and addresses the negative influences that homophobia, transphobia, and heterosexism have on the lives of LGBTQ clients. So this affirming care, and as I, mentioned at the beginning, I believe that trauma-informed care really is the foundation to be able to apply this LGBTQIA plus affirming care. And this affirming care, like any care, can be life-saving for individuals. It is care that is really looking at an individual's identity as being a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. That education about the community in establishing practices and policies for that affirming care that can support their recovery as well. Because when, someone might be in a program for substance abuse, if they're also experiencing microaggressions that are happening in the program, or they're being misgendered, or they are experiencing discrimination within that setting, that ultimately is not leading to healing. It's more so pushing them more towards the substance, which has been from, I can't speak from that personal experience, but I've heard others say that it it is sometimes the only friend that they have, or the only support that they have in that substance or alcohol. So then when, they're in these programs trying to navigate recovery when they're further experiencing um, discrimination. It's not leading to recovery. It's only hurting their recovery. And how can we apply this affirming care? What can we do to do that? How can programs be altered to, provide this care? So define heterosexism, and what that means. I'm jumping ahead, but really exploring and initiating those entrenched heterosexist social customs. For example, asking a female whether she has a boyfriend rather than a partner. Those um, various things that we might see of, let's just see being in a certain job, is representative of someone's sexuality as well. So really define heterosexism and everything that we as a society have, you know, grown up in, and really to try to put a barrier in that and trying to change that narrative. Advocating in and outside of every interaction that you have with others, engaging in professional and personal growth beyond just mere tolerance of orientations and gender expressions. Really taking those collaborative measures with youth and teens and adults, and really fostering that wellness and optimal mental health through advocacy and clinical interventions, really creating those therapeutic spaces. And when I say therapeutic spaces, yes, it can be like in therapy, in the healthcare profession, but it can be in your homes as well. When you're having, let's just say, for example, let's just say you have a library of books, and unfortunately, maybe none of those books are by LGBTQIA plus authors. What message is that sending to those individuals in the community when they're not seeing themselves represented, let's just say in the library, or for example, seeing themselves like maybe through paintings or magazines or what have you. When you are looking at those therapeutic spaces, though, you really are looking at, those chart records, not having check boxes. So for example, instead of having someone check, their gender being, male, female, or, transgender, allowing them to put what they want to put in there. Those are the things that can lead to that healing for someone who is in recovery for substance abuse, especially among the community when they are in these spaces that are affirming and celebrating their identity. Introducing yourself with your pronouns and asking an individual what their pronouns are, and also recognizing that pronouns can change and not necessarily judging it, just okay, thanks for sharing, what your pronouns are. Um, that is an important piece, which is why, you see it in a lot of email signatures as well, because it can be an indicator for someone that you have at least some knowledge of, the LGBTQIA plus community, and potentially some of their experiences. When it comes to, at having that affirming care as well, it's really developing just a general conceptualization of the culture or mental health care. By no means, I would say that any LGBTQA plus person is wanting to know everything about everything. I can't even, I don't know everything. And I am a part of the community, but really having a general concept of some of the nuances of the community, also knowing just what is going on. So not, looking the other way, pretending as that, the attack that is happening on the community right now, it's not happening because it is. We see it every day. So having that knowledge of what is going on, what some of their experiences might be, so that you can approach it with empathy and love. When someone uses the incorrect personal pronouns, just informing that person, not making a big to-do out of it, but just saying, hey, they use these pronouns, and just honoring it. Or if you accidentally misgender, which can happen, I know I've definitely done it before, just say, oh, sorry, I meant to say blah, 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 blah. Not making a big to-do out of it and making it about you, trying to move towards more of that inclusive language. These are just some of the terms here. For example, a birthing professional, people who give birth, counsel person, male person, a partner, Latinx. So using some of these terms in, you know, in all of these settings, whether it be at home or in healthcare settings, um, to really show that you are including everyone and acknowledging that people have various identities. Asking that youth or teen or individual adult as well, simply what does that mean to you? How do you identify? Like I said, what it means for me to say that I identify as a gay man is not going to look the same for anybody else because there's only one Lewis. There's only one such and such, this person, that person. So really just asking, what does that mean to you? You know, what does it mean to be a individual who identifies as gay and um, with the knowledge that the community is oftentimes built on celebrating and really drinking and substances and such, which is a lot of asking that person, what does that mean for you? How do you fit into that mix? Just to show them that you want to know about their experience. And finally, and I say this for everyone, engaging in self-care, whatever that looks like for you, because we cannot do this work as, family members, as helping professionals as well without engaging in our self-care. So I just want to, just my references here. And I'm not 100% sure. I am happy to share this slide deck as well with Ken to share with others. So you have that information. But I really just wanted to thank you for sharing space with me, and here is my contact information. I hope this was, like I said, I had to condense it for sure, just to try to give you the, most important pieces. But I hope that this provided you with an opportunity to learn that, you know, why substance abuse, alcohol use is so much higher because of all of the additional factors that an LGBTQIA plus individual is experiencing. So I'll turn it over to Damien now, or Kim, and I want to thank you once again.
Oh, thank you, Lewis. Wow, that was super comprehensive. I actually really would love, if you wouldn't mind sharing the slide deck, because
Yeah,
we can put that on that follow-up page as well. There's a lot of really great research in there that I was not aware of. I thought
yeah,
I'd done a lot of research in this myself, but you shared a lot of new great information, and
yeah.
I've got some questions for you on the other end.
Yep.
Get to
Awesome.
Q&A. But
Sounds good.
I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend Damien, who, man, how do you introduce this man? He's just
Turn on my light.
right ahead. He is beloved within the recovery community, within my world of family members who need some levity and understanding and support, and he gets this topic on so many levels. And he always says yes when we ask, and he's like Mr. Service. So, Damien, just thank you so much
My
for being
pleasure.
with us. And yeah, I'll give you the spotlight.
All right. Hey, hi everyone. I'm trying to figure out. I used to be on a laptop and then my laptop died. So now I'm on a desktop. So I never know where the camera on it is. So d forgive me for like if I'm not. I don't even know where I'm supposed to be looking. Um,
You're good.
I'm I'm such a I'm not even a boomer. Um, but yeah. So thank you, Kim, and thank you, Lewis. That was amazing. And as somebody who grew up in the 80s, gay and alcoholic in training, that information, it's almost like the longer I stay sober and I hear these things, I'm like, oh, that's why that was. And that's why I feel like this. And this is why, this was like that. So it's always so, I hate to say validating, but it's so good sometimes to hear that there are actual studies now for that explain what I went through. I've been sober for 27 years. I got sober at 28. I was born in the late 60s. And so I miss like the whole like free love thing and like the peace, love, and all that stuff. But I did get like the late 70s, early 80s kind of like disco transition thing there. So I grew up, I always say, my story is I grew up fat, gay, and Catholic in the 80s. So um, that in itself is like the trifecta for me to um I would joke, it's just it's kind of like the suicide note wrote itself. By the time I had my first drink, I had already tried to kill myself once. And ironically, by the time I had my last drink, I was on the verge of doing it again. I I didn't, I didn't grow up in an environment or a culture where you were able to talk about things like sexuality or homosexuality or any kind of like gender questioning ideology, because things were very cut and dry, things were very private. There was no social media. You gossiped about the neighbors, and you passed notes in school, and that was basically our social media, was passing notes and gossip. So I grew up in a family, actually, that great family, very loving, two older brothers. But again, it was the 80s, and you didn't talk about this stuff, especially as AIDS came into the picture, because then I had this great perfect storm of the church, because I'm Catholic, or was Catholic, and I'm going to a Catholic school, and I'm an altar boy, and the church is telling us that gay people are going to hell. And then AIDS happens, and then the government is telling us that gay people are spreading a pandemic. And then it's we're the villains, and every representation of gays and lesbians at that time were very tragic. They were either awful people or they were dying. So, of course, this is not the environment that you are growing up open-minded and open-hearted. So I learned, and some of the stuff that Lois was touching on was like, I didn't grow up as myself. I grew up as the version of Damien that my parents expected, that my school expected, that the church expected, that society expected, that my neighbors expected, that my brothers expected. I never got to be who I really was. And when I would, especially moving into adolescence, when I would let that version of myself come out, he was immediately mocked, beaten, um, you know, ostracized, all those things, not at the hands of my family, because my family was amazing. And my parents definitely knew. They just never said anything. It was the school. It was the Catholic school system. It was the all boys Catholic school that I went to. And so I learned how to lie. I learned how to not be myself. I learned how to create a version of myself. And then when I discovered alcohol and drugs, those truly helped elevate me to a status of somebody who I first wasn't. And by the end, who I didn't want to be. And it protected me for a long time, because when you are colorful and creative and eccentric, all the words that the nicer people would use to describe me, when you add alcohol and drugs to that system, I became far more colorful and eccentric and creative and unexpected. So I definitely hid behind it, and I became. I think I was definitely alcoholic way before I drank. I was addicted to TV shows. I was addicted to reading. I was addicted to food. I was addicted to attention, and more so attention, approval. And then when I didn't get the approval, at least if I could get attention, those were my early drugs of choice. And then when I started to drink, I actually kind of blossomed in school and socially. It helped me, and I was still being bullied on a regular basis, and sometimes very violently. And again, like, I graduated from high school in '87, and nobody talked about trauma at that point. Nobody talked about victimization, microaggressions, safe spaces. There was none of that. Like, nobody had rubber wristbands for bullying. It was just, you took it. And it wasn't until I was almost 10 years sober that I was able to recognize that the things that I went through in high school and in my early to early to late teens, really, was a consistent and systematic trauma. And I didn't know how to deal with it, because I was still, even though I was sober and was working a program, I was still carrying around a ton of shame, and I was carrying around a ton of guilt and regret. So when I ended up getting sober at 28, I had come out 2 years earlier. And again, the generation that is happening right now fascinates me and infuriates me, because they get to come out at like 12, 13, and they have outlets, they have facilities, they have organizations that are there to support them in their coming out process, and to create safe spaces, and to give them the community that I was not afforded. So I came out very late. And again, though, I wasn't passing. Like, people were not like, oh yeah, he's an alpha male. But I came out at 26, and my friends were all, but by that time I was also a full-blown alcoholic and addict. So, and I was angry, and I was toxic, and I was full of fury. And it was all really just all this pain I was carrying around that the alcohol was no longer treating, that I was now inflicting on other people. So I came out, and my friends were all like, oh, you're going to be so much happier now. You're going to be so much happier now. And it was 1992. No, it was like 95. And it didn't get better. I hate to say it. Like, again, like, we didn't have an organization called It Gets Better then. It did not get better. My drinking got worse. Because now I was living openly, but still with all that shame and that guilt, and that, like, I still didn't know who I was, because I'd never gotten to be this person. And when you delay that kind of growth, anything that makes me feel better, I'm going for. And so the drinking and the drugging got far worse in those final years. And then I got sober, and I was, in the same way that I know I was an alcoholic before I drank, I was kind of obsessed with sobriety before I got sober. And I didn't realize this until much later also. I was kind of like, I was drawn to narratives about people bottoming out and getting sober. I was drawn to TV shows that were telling those stories. I was drawn to, and I grew up in a world where there were like after school specials where they never really got to like the sober part. They would just be like, oh, this, like, I share about this one all the time. There was a TV movie with Scott Baio called The Boy Who Drank Too Much. And it was literally like, he drank too much for 98% of the movie. And then in the last 5 minutes, like, he got yelled at, and the principal, and his best friend yelled at him, and it was this horrible intervention, and then he got sober, and then it was the end. So I never saw any kind, but like I was drawn to these narratives of like people bottoming out. So like books about like celebrities who had bottomed out and got like gone to Betty Ford. I was like, oh my God, Betty Ford. So that was all I had when I got sober. I didn't know that there were like, I didn't want to go to a rehab because, like I knew the only rehabs I knew were like Betty Ford, and like Eric Clapton had one called like Malibu Promises. I didn't know that there were other ones around me, but I was so interested in the stories of these things that I would read about them before, and like I would read them while drinking. And the things that I found out about, especially the gay and lesbian community at the time, was the statistics for drug and alcohol and substance abuse disorder within that community was through the roof. Like it was astronomical. I think it was like 1 in 3 at the time. And this was in the 90s when, like so much had not even happened yet. So I kind of had it wasn't like a softer landing, but it was like, again, it kind of explained like, oh, that might be what's going on here. And when I got sober, um, I was I was lucky enough to work with a bunch of messes. So I worked with but I think any alcoholic can say this because we find like water seeks its own level. So no matter where I was working, I was going to find people who were as bad as me. And I had hung out, like I was with a group of people that drank just as horribly as me and did as much, other substances as possible. But one of them got sober, and he of course had to be ostracized and pushed out of the social scene because it was for his own good. But also, I wasn't just going to go to like game night with this sober guy and not be able to get completely wrecked. But he got sober and he started to look better. He started to show up for work. He stopped throwing up at work like the rest of us. And when I finally hit my bottom and it became very clear that I needed to make some kind of move, I reached out to him, and he had about 6 months of sobriety, and he helped me find my way into a 12-step program, which I'm currently still a very active member of, because it has given me an incredible life. The one thing that it didn't really give me, though, because again, I got sober in '97. I didn't find a big gay community. When I got sober, I got sober in the PA suburbs, so there's not a ton of us anyway. And so then you reduce that statistic even lower to like sober gays. And my first couple of years, there were like a couple lesbians from Westchester, and then like one guy from like my area that I'm like, I think he might be gay, but he keeps talking about a wife, but I'm not buying it. So I didn't really have that, and so I had to go find it. And my sponsor, at the time, he got concerned because he was like, he was straight. All my sponsors have been straight, but he was like, there's a part of you that's missing. There's a part of you that you are not acknowledging. And it was like 5 years of being sober before I actually started to talk about that. And so he encouraged me to start finding meetings for gays and lesbians or LGBTQ. And again, like this was back when it was just like LGBT or LGBTQ. I don't know. Like this is way before it got long. And so I was going into the city. I was driving into Philly to go to these, like there's a clubhouse downtown that I would go to find these meetings. And what I found was I had gotten comfortable in my own skin without really building a community of gays and lesbians around me, which led me to almost like not a self-loathing, but almost a fear of it, a fear of that community, of leaning into that, because I hadn't addressed the shame and the guilt. But I no longer had the drugs and alcohol to like salve that. So I needed to do something with that. And I was going through the 12-step program as it's laid out, and had gotten to a point where I noticed that some of my relationships were echoing some of the very toxic and painful relationships that I had had when I was drinking and when I was younger and going through the trauma of being a closeted gay man. And I realized that these relationships were echoing those relationships, and none of those relationships were healthy or ended well. And it was causing me a ton of pain. And I finally had to start addressing that. And what happened was I started to share more openly about that shame, that guilt, that regret, that that trauma, that that trauma that I, because all along, like I'm a solid believer in, like, I was born an alcoholic. I think the trauma that I endured and then ignored and then finally addressed definitely crafted how I found my space, found my way to drugs and alcohol, and how I became more reliant on them than maybe I would have. So I was about 12 years sober, and I started to look at this, and I started to look at these relationships and started to realize that I was applying the thinking of a drunk, closeted gay man to relationships of an open, like an out, proud, sober man, sober gay man. And it changed everything for me. It changed everything for me because, and again, at this point, there weren't really and there probably were, and I just wasn't looking hard enough, or I was still acting in some fear, but I didn't know about the resources that were there to help me. I just relied on the steps and the 12-step program and the people in it and honesty and my sponsors and my friends and my sober support group and my family. Um, and I wish I had investigated those avenues a little bit deeper, because I probably would have found professional therapeutic help that would have sped up the healing process a lot faster. To have had somebody who understood, like, the things that Lewis talked about before me, like if I had somebody like that to talk to when I was 30, oh, I mean, heaven, or 40 even. So it has been a wild journey of because I always, when I came in and when I got sober, I did look around and think there's not a lot of people like me. Um, and then because of the way, like, the principles of the 12-step program that I'm in, um, everyone is the same. Like, we're all, like they say, like, we're all, all bozos on the bus, or like workers among workers, or, like, and I could lean into the I'm terminally unique because there aren't a lot of people like me. But then anyone in the rooms can say the same thing. Maybe there's not a lot of single widowed moms, in the rooms at the same time, or there's not a lot of, like, there's not a lot of trans people in the meetings right now. So they can easily come in and say, there's not a lot of people like me. There's not a lot of people of color in the area that I'm sober in. So they can say the same thing. But the great thing is that we're in that room, we are equals. And so I don't sometimes need to find somebody who is gay or lesbian or in the queer community to understand me on that level. But it is nice to also have found the courage and the freedom to build relationships with gays and lesbians and members of the queer community outside of my sobriety, because that is eventually what the goal of being sober is to build a life in and out of those rooms and those meetings that is as fully, fleshed out as I want it to be. And so I have this rich tapestry of relationships of gays, lesbians, straights, people of color, golfers, so many golfers around here, married people, which, God bless them, you can't help how you're born. But you know what? I don't need it shoved down my face. Like, I just, like, we get it. You're married. No, it's just like, and that's the thing, is like, I'm able to laugh now about pretty much everything. I take my sobriety very seriously. I take helping newcomers and people finding their way into sobriety very seriously. But everything else is, that is probably one of the best gifts sobriety has given me. Is that because, everyone's like, oh, gay people are always so funny. We actually are. We're like hysterical, super weird too. But I'm able to get back to being, like, kind of the cliche of, like, I'm a pretty happy, gay, funny guy. And it's all because I'm sober. Because I will tell you, when I was in the depths of it, no one was laughing. Nobody was laughing. Like, even the the old school meaning of gay. I was not. So it has been a pleasure being sober and being here tonight and hearing this, because it, again, anything that helps me kind of clarify and edify what I went through was real and not just a perceived, you know, self-imposed pain, that it was true trauma. I'm so grateful to hear that, because it does explain a lot, but it also reminds me how far I've gotten to come from it. So that's all I've got tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, Damien, so said so many great things there. I learned something about you every time. It's wonderful. I'm gonna try to add my spotlight and get Lewis in here too. So you've heard this said, I'm sure, and our friend Caroline Finkel says it all the time, that the opposite of addiction is connection. So you talked about how being connected to people, like when the sobriety piece, that you connected because of the desire to stop drinking.
Yeah.
But sounds like you've really been missing that LGBTQI plus population being part of that connection. Do you feel like that's an important piece of it as part of your recovery?
I think it is. Like I've been able to, in the last probably 10 years, really expand and dig deeper roots into that community, become more active in it, and also kind of own more of it. And it definitely has. It definitely has helped me, because again, like it's interesting. So my older brother is gay. And he's married, and they have like designer dogs and like the perfect home and all that stuff. And so it was weird, because like I always used to, like, especially when I was drinking or like newly sober, I would harass him about being like the worst role model because he never supported me, blah blah blah. And now I have some of the most fun with my gay brother and his husband and some of our friends. We're not like pride marching guys, but we're definitely like old movie watching, like charcuterie board gays, and it's so much fun. It's so much fun.
I just had another question and now I lost it. Well, I really want to hear from our guests who are on as well. Please feel free to either put something in the chat or unmute and ask a question. Love to hear from you. I know I'm going to have more things I want to ask you both.
Yeah, it is. It's true. Like I mean, thinking about, like, because I was the video game thing that you mentioned, that I never think about that one, because I was an Atari kid. Like we were playing video games before Super Nintendo and all that stuff. We were Atari. And the addiction to like the fighting for like TV time and like fighting with my brothers to get to play and all that, like it was brutal, and like collecting as many games as possible. And then it became reading, like my book, like I was shoplifting books as like a 10-year-old. So there's definitely like those, like, and like they weren't even books I wanted to read. I wanted to collect them. I wanted to have them. I just wanted to like gather things. And they always say, like, my addiction was to more. It was just to more. And it was, video games, you know, books, then it was food. And then it was, then it was smoking. Actually, I started smoking before I did anything. So yeah, it was definitely, the addiction was, I'm in it right now. Like, I'm not going to lie. I still buy books that I have no intention of reading. I've recently gotten obsessed with Labubus. Okay. These damn little toys that you have to hunt down online to find. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, process addictions are a thing, right? And interactive addiction disorders and all of that kind of stuff. So we've got to be mindful about like what brought us to the substance or whatever in the first place, whatever that first drug was that came along, or that first behavior that came along. We know that it's whack-a-mole, right? You put one down, another one pops up. So
Yeah.
going after what really is the underlying void that we're trying to fill, pain that we're trying to soothe, all of
And
that.
that's right. That is like half my life, not half my life, but like there are so many times where because I'm trying, you know, like I'm getting the food thing under control, the drugs and alcohol are under control. Shopping becomes a thing. And I have so frequently bought something and then returned it within 24 hours because I buy it and then I have that like sober thought of like, why do I need this? What am I doing with this?
Mhm.
I bought a Nintendo Switch. It sat on the chair for literally a day, and then I just took it back to Best Buy. I was like, I'm never going to use this. I'm never going to. There was no urgency to set it up or play with it. Just, I was like, I'm clearly trying to fill some kind of hole.
Well, thank God you have that kind of realization, that
Yeah.
clarity, just to see it and to, modify your behavior around it. I mean, Gabor Mate, who I'm sure, Lewis, because he talks eloquently all the time about how trauma plays, he really believes that every single person with an SUD has had trauma.
Hmm.
Which I agree with 80% of what he says. But anyway, he speaks very openly about the fact that he has a shopping addiction, that he would buy when albums were a thing, it was albums. Then when CDs were a thing, it was CDs. And he had like just an obscene number of them. And it was just pathological. And it was obviously something that was his process
Yeah.
addiction. And I mean, you know how the 12-step programs have so many amazing slogans. And I think that what came to my mind is you were speaking to, Damien, was it wasn't my problem, it was my solution,
Mm.
you know.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, Lewis, if because we were looking at all those stats of how the LGBTQI plus community is at greater risk, what are some protective factors, do you think? Like you said that you are not a person who has struggled with this,
Mhm.
with substance use.
Yeah.
So, if would you be comfortable sharing, like, what do you think
Yes,
in your life
absolutely.
that was a protective
Absolutely.
factor for you?
Yeah, I would say like I do I'm not gonna lie, like just even this presentation and preparing for this really had me thinking like, what kept me from going down a different route? Like even in my present day, like, people offer certain substances and I'm like, no, that's not for me. And it's just simply not. However, though, like it speaks to just how readily accessible things are. But honestly, I would say the biggest protective or preventative factor has been a support system, like more than anything, like a strong support system. Um, has been pretty significant in my life, whether it be with friends and family, um, and having that. And I also would say that, I'm someone who has been in therapy for almost 16 years with the same therapist. And because of that, it's allowed me to process through things that would come up in my life, issues that would come up for me as a gay man and having someone to talk to and process through that. So, I heard Damien speaking about it, how like had he had, someone to process through some of these things that he was going through, that it would have made a big difference. So I must say that like it's been a huge part of my life. And I would say I attribute to my therapist a lot of times, like processing through the challenges, whether it be through family issues, relationship with food and such, like because I've had that, therapist who's that neutral party. And as I mentioned, just supportive people in my life. So that has been the biggest, I would say, supportive people because like growing up for me, like hearing about LGBTQIA plus affirming care, that
Mm.
wasn't in my vernacular. I never even heard of that. And I'm gonna lie, until probably entering this profession, like it just wasn't in my vernacular. Like it's like even like using pronouns, like really
Mm.
that wasn't. So I think more than anything, the support of people helped because that affirming care, I don't know if it really existed. And I mean, like I'm only, in my mid 30s, but like it in life just looks different, I will say now than it did, growing up for me.
Yeah, we have another program that actually Damon has also participated in that's called the Search for Identity. And when we talk about young people and that's a prevention program. And so we're looking at young people and how family members can really want to slap a label on our child, right? Like, oh, they're so good with Legos, they're going to be an engineer, or gifted,
Mm.
class clown. That that could be a little onerous for somebody to have to carry that label. And what we're recognizing too is we show some stats about when people are asked how you feel about forms having different ways that people identify their sexuality or their gender, the disparity in the boomers versus
Mhm.
Z,
Yeah.
Gen X, millennials, all that kind of stuff, that you can see generation gaps, actual gaps, where young people also, what they looked at was like, how many people do you know who are non-binary? Huge gap, that doesn't mean that there aren't people in my generation that wouldn't love to transition or consider themselves, they, them, that sort of thing, but
Right.
they just generationally, it's like not cool. Young people, it's getting there, but I love that. And I think, Damien, you're on that time when Lee described left-handedness, that we didn't accommodate people for being left-handed until what, like the 50s, maybe something like that. So people who identified as being left-handed was like had this little low mark on this chart.
Mhm.
And then when they started accommodating, like people identified as being left-handed went up. Obviously, the number of people who are left-handed didn't increase, but it's a great analogy, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. And I find myself, because I'm in that generation that like possibly there are people of my age that are still like, I don't get it. And but I find, and they're always like, I find myself having these conversations, and it's usually like a generation above me where they add like, oh, like where are all these trans people coming from? It's just like now it's just trendy. And I'm like, no, no, no. You have to understand, it's now not demonized.
Right.
Like they've been there all along. They just feel safer saying it now, And now, of course, it's less safe to say it. But like all these people that were like, oh, everyone's just like jumping on a bandwagon. I'm like, trust me, this is not something we like. Nobody's like wants to be gay. Like nobody's like, yeah, I want to be completely marginalized and made fun of, and like, it's just, yeah. So, but it's always the generation, and then every once in a while you run into young people. I'm like, what school did you go to? Like, who is failing you? There's a girl in my gym. We just call her Bigot Barbie.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, I don't understand. Like, you seem like you had nice parents and just doesn't get it. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And like 20. She's like 20.
Ah,
Yeah. And then like that's the thing is, the resources are there for both young, like all generations to get this information now. Like in the way I was blind to it today because of the internet and social media and regular media like legacy media, there is so much information out there now that if you don't understand something, you can get clarity. It's just, what are you willing to learn or not?
that's what I was gonna say. Do they want to
Right,
understand, or does
right.
it? Yeah,
Is it
I'm not
easier?
sure.
Is it easier to just be, you know, contempt prior to investigation?
Yeah, to other them,
Yeah, to other them. Yeah.
other you, yeah. And I'm sure Louis could talk all night long about like what's going on with that woman, that she feels
Mm.
the need to project that kind of.
Yes,
Yeah.
I always say it comes back to trauma 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
Like it does, it really does. Like we don't just start responding a certain way, like something causes it to happen for
Right.
us to respond in a certain way.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. Well, we're at 8:31. Here is wishing that no one encounters bigot Barbie in their lives and bigoted Barbie, whatever you call her. Um,
Good Barbie.
bigot Barbie. Oh my God, I love that. Um, Thank you both so very much for all of your wisdom. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being here with us, to our participants. I hope you all have enjoyed the rest of Pride Month.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Damien. You're the
Sure.
best.